All right, we're back with more NFL coverage. And in this one, we have a follow-up on the Marshawn Kneeland situation that took place months ago. Now, I initially covered it then, and quite frankly, when it comes to the details of the incident, there is no way to sugarcoat what took place on that night of November 6th. But to briefly summarize it a bit, what was initially perceived as a car accident, seeing as they were tracking down his vehicle and it actually crashed into a specific area near a highway in Dallas. They check it out and they find in that moment footprints leading them to believe that Kneeland was fleeing the scene, and he went on foot to another location that couldn't have been too far away from the area, but enough to warrant a bit of a search on their end. On top of this, you had an active call and pair of calls between the police and the authorities and also his girlfriend at the time and family, as they believed, with a text message that he had left in a group chat with all of them involved in it, that he was going to take his own life. The text message read goodbye, and it led them to believe that he had ideations of self-harm in his mind, and they feared the worst in that moment. So they go on, they search, and ultimately they find that Marshawn Kneeland would in fact take his own life just a few days after what looked like a turning point in his NFL career up to that point. An individual who, through injuries and honestly through playing time with some of the other edge rushers that were on that team, had not necessarily found his stride up to that point on the Monday Night Football game leading up to the incident. He had, quite frankly, his best performance. He scored his first NFL touchdown. Everything seemed to be going very well until you just get blindsided by that on the ensuing Wednesday. So that was the situation basically summed up right there. An unfortunate one to say the least. The man was just 24 years old. And you genuinely do not know what exactly people may be going through, but it just tore so many people up. You could only imagine how the family was feeling in a situation like this, considering that his girlfriend at the time was actually pregnant. So you have to juxtapose trying to labor and give birth to a potential new life of yours, while at the same time mourning and trying to honor that of a late partner of yours. And for the family, a late son, brother, in some instances of theirs, is just gone in an instant like that. And while there was a belief from them in that moment that the worst could have happened, they genuinely did not know it would reach that point. And so it was just a gut-wrenching moment. Of course, the family is going to feel it the worst, and as I mentioned in that particular video, the team as well. They were on a shorter week, but to hear those news just a couple days after a man who they had spent time with for a good amount of months in a row, with the command that a team will bind you to have when you're actively playing for one. You have to give so much of your time and energy to every single individual you suit up with on the NFL playing field, and even those who might not necessarily get the same kind of playing time. All of your time during the season is spent with these people. And just like that, one of their very own Maybe they didn't know him all that well. Maybe some in that locker room got to know him very well in that short period of time. But regardless, it definitely shook a lot of the players up. And they tried as best as they could to honor him in the games moving forward. And also, behind the scenes, they did something truly special in that moment. Which kind of leads us to the first general update on this situation. Because, like I said, at that time, his girlfriend, Catalina Mansera, was pregnant with an unborn child at that time. In fact, just a couple months before the incident took place, she had this video that would eventually be released of her conveying the news of her pregnancy over to Marshawn Kneeland. And on that video, apparently from what has been written, she has him smiling ear to ear at the news. It's a huge moment, and it brings about a lot of change for anyone involved in that situation. When you're bringing a new life into this world, it seemed as if he was very welcoming of the situation, and obviously happy for his girlfriend. They're willing to stand by her side and support her through this time as she tries to navigate this for the next 9-month period. Now, again, there is not really a question as to the kind of commitment that he might have had to her. I mean, from everything that we've seen up to this point, it appears as if they had a very good relationship. None of the documents out there, kind of allude to anything suspicious behind the scenes that we don't know about. They seem to be very great for each other. And you could tell that in that video. So to have a situation like that happen, in her view, knowing that this is about to go down within the next few months or so, you can't help but just feel for her in that situation. And yet through it all, she has still stood in mourning and also celebration of Marshawn Kneeland, just consistently praising him at every turn and making sure that his legacy, while we don't really know from the outside looking in what could have truly happened in his final moments, they want to make sure collectively that the impact he had on everyone in his life leading up to that moment carries a lot of weight in the conversation. And that's very commendable on her end. But of course, with that impending expectation, it was inevitable before she would give birth. And per the first report from AOL and other sources, on June 11th, she birthed a son. The now nearly 1-month-old child's name is Makai, and as she shared on an Instagram post on June 15th, he was born on June 11th. Just a truly significant event. Like I said previously, you may have a situation where you have the loss of life on one end, and that can be hard to stomach. But at the same time, through all that strife, you get a moment like this, nearly 7 months or so later following the incident. And nothing that I could really say here can allow a person to understand just how important that truly is. Mansera made sure to signify it throughout this entire rollout. she, for example, in the caption wrote, "My favorite gift from you," with a silver heart, signifying once again that Kneeland, for a person who could have been experiencing a lot in that time that we may not know about in the public eye, still, in all that turmoil he may have been dealing with, he was able to produce something magnificent from it. And Montserrat, at the very least, even if Kneeland may not be, is still very much well and present to care for this child in the best way that she can. She had a onesie of a Marshawn Kneeland image on the child, as well as this picture shows, also with the name under this particular bed here. So, just a truly beautiful moment in a situation that otherwise you could look at as very tragic in so many ways, and still, in some others, like searching for a full answer as to what may have happened. Of course, the family would still be looking for clarity, but, with this birth here and with this child nearly being a month old, it just gets you to thinking. This kid is literally going to have to go through life, go through school, go through any kind of social experience, right? And they can, try for as long as they can to hold it off. Whenever he has to hear the entire background on the events surrounding the presence of solely his mother and why Marshawn Kneeland is not around, it is going to hurt like hell. I would have to imagine. Like, you're obviously not going to say that to a child who is nearly 1 month old. But as he grows on and grows older and sees all this imagery, all these specific kind of, not necessarily anniversaries, but like every single November 6th, they're gonna hold some kind of commemoration for that day. It is going to be tough for the kid. And you just hope that everyone around him, because it will take a village, it will take more than Montserrat, the entire family is going to have to lean on them and lean around them and shower them with love and affection. They're going to need it. That news can genuinely crush a young individual like that. It's hard. We have no way of controlling that situation at all. And as far as we know right now, looking at it optically, little Makai is virtually the only one right now who really does not have a clue. 'Tis the innocence of a child. He has literally no idea. And will not be able to fully process it, even if they do tell him that early. It's going to take years for him to process until it really hits him. But for as long as they can right now, you want him to live his best life. And so, you hope from this standpoint that there's a lot of it out there for him. Because even in a situation like that, it won't define Marshawn Kneeland's legacy. It hasn't. And it can make up part of his story. It doesn't have to be the end-all, be-all. he can still find a way to shape his own path moving forward around that. Yes, it will definitely pain him whenever he hears it. But that perseverance, that fortitude is going to lean heavily into his ability to just power through it and make the most out of the situation. Montserrat as well is going to take on a tough task herself. But again, as long as she has assistance in a genuine care for everyone surrounding her, it's not impossible to still be the best mother for her son that she can be. It's not impossible. Now, with that being said, as significant as this event is, you are probably wondering, man, you don't have the father of this child around, and you have just the mother primarily in this household with the child. They could potentially need a lot more help than just the family being around. They are going to need extra resources. They're going to need other types of care that we can't even measure up right now, considering the circumstance. And you'd be right. Thankfully, there has already been a solution for that. You see, one of the ways that the Cowboys went about honoring him was that on the part of Brian Schottenheimer and other people in the organization. A few days after the incident made the rounds, and after they heard about it, held a vigil for him, they decided that it would be optimal for them to create a fund. The Marshawn Kneeland Fund was established essentially just a few days later. And in it, all the money that could be donated to it was set to aid Montserrat and the now nearly month-old son with ample resources and money to help them out during this time, to continue this long, daunting journey of care for the young son and keeping this family pretty much ready for anything when it comes to the financial implication. So they established that fund in November. Now, I did try, when looking this up, I did try to see, okay, is there any information on how much money has been pumped in there to this point? After all, it was established in November. They do not have a specific disclosure on the amount that has been donated over this time. And I believe that's intentional, which is fair. You want to keep that private. As crazy as some people get out there, if they were to figure out the amount, they could try a number of things to just continue trapping this family into a weird situation after they've already dealt with that. You don't want to have anything going on like that with all that they've been through. So you keep that information private as best as you can. And, if other people in their circle find out, that makes sense. But they haven't publicly disclosed that, and they shouldn't. All we can say right now is that I would believe, with the kind of support that they've gotten, I would imagine that there's a pretty sizable amount of money in this fund that will go to them. And it's a long-term thing. They don't have a cap on the amount that can be donated like typical fundraisers would have. This is a long-standing, long-term thing. So, whatever you can do. And it's on the internet. I don't exactly know how to link it to my video, but it is on the internet if you search it up. So, hey, like, if you even care to do so, if you want to help and assist them in the best way that you can, you're free to do it as many times as you want. It's not a one-stop shop. It's not a one-time thing. It can be recurring. You could go there and make multiple donations if you want to over the months. It's open for pretty much a while as far as we know right now. There's literally no close to it. No reported close to it, at least. So, I'm sure that they are getting a lot of the attention that they deserve in this. And, every dollar that has been committed to there up to this point helps. Beyond just, this stage of providing the child with the proper meals, bottles, toys, diapers, other resources, but even as they grow older, assisting the child with different items to go to school, potentially if he wanted to be involved in any extracurriculars, providing funding for that, setting up a college fund that can pay forward into a hopefully eventful education and post-secondary establishments. That's the goal. That's the plan. So that serves as the first portion of this update in the situation, because honestly, it's fair. It is right within the timeline of the reporting. And there's a weird kind of beauty to have a child be born in this situation, especially with the weight that it carries for all others involved except the child himself right now, who does not have the proper conscience to, again, understand. This child is probably still, actively trying to figure out how to talk, how to walk. Like, there's no way for him to know right now. He is probably still speaking in Babel. So, you can't really say much in regards to that. But genuinely, you wish this family all the best. They have been through a whirlwind over the past 7+ months now. And this is a huge moment for everyone. Obviously, the girlfriend, Montserrat, but everyone, to have a new addition to the family. So I hope that he gets all the care in the world, and that he is overwhelmed. Same with Montserrat with support here. That is the least that can be done in a situation like this. Now, after that point, you still, amongst the family, would have your suspicions. Like, yes, the ideations were alluded to on the phone calls, and there had been some other reports over time of Marshawn Kneeland having a few mental health issues. For example, this quote says, according to records obtained by ESPN, there have been concerns about Kneeland's mental health as far back as 2020 when he was at Western Michigan. In one incident, he was required to turn in his firearm to police until he was cleared by a counselor. In another, a friend called authorities with concern over Kneeland's well-being. He was found on railroad tracks saying he hoped the train would run him over. He was hospitalized. End quote. So, yeah. Unfortunate as the situation is, it was far from the first time that Kneeland had displayed signs of a mental health struggle. And, when you're seeing it for the first time, it's, easy to just say, hey, you seem to have all this familial support around you. You seem to have a good relationship with your significant other, in regards to your spouse here, how is it that he can continue to act like that? That would just be a case where you would truly have to understand just how deep mental health can get. Even with the amount of people surrounding an individual, and even with the understanding that these people are cared for, the mind can honestly take individuals who suffer from this in such a different direction. And, no amount of good standing, of good condition in regards to a household, no amount of money or lack thereof, and no amount of even goodwill from that standpoint helps in a situation like this. Mental health can truly sneak up on anyone. It is one sort of, phenomena. It does not discriminate. It has no boundaries. It knows none. You could be feeling a certain way one day in a positive light, and then you can just sink so far back down into the other end. Maybe something triggers it for some people. Maybe this is how they just generally feel on a consistent basis. But that is how mental health works. Just because you find yourself in a great position doesn't inherently mean that you just will not deal with those problems, or that you can just suddenly turn on the switch to be happy and forget about all of that. So it's tough to say that, especially in Kneeland's case, knowing that all this was going on while he was still in college. It's just hard to really say that it would be easy for him to turn that off. Still, even with all that in mind, and even with what they heard, you still are searching for so many answers because it happened so sudden. Yes, from the public viewpoint, we last saw him on Monday Night Football. And we hear about that news a couple days later. For this family, they could have very well had contact with him a few days before that. Maybe the day of the game, maybe the day after the game, maybe that same Wednesday night. Hence the text. And you'd still be trying to figure out at this point what could have factored into him committing self-harm and taking his own life. What in those last few moments, and maybe even before then, in terms of days, weeks, months prior, might have led to him doing this? Well, per Adam Schefter and other sources, the answer to that question becomes a little bit, and I mean a little bit, clearer. According to this source from USA Today, quote, former Dallas Cowboys defensive end Marshawn Kneeland has been diagnosed with stage 1 CTE. Kneeland, who died by self-harm at 24 years old in November 2025, was diagnosed posthumously by researchers at Boston University CTE Center, according to a press release from the Concussion and CTE Foundation. Kneeland was in his second professional season with the Cowboys when he died. The press release noted that he had been playing tackle football since he was 7 years old. End quote. Stage 1 CTE is what Kneeland was posthumously diagnosed with on this particular day. Now, granted, when it comes to situations like this, as I always have to say, the only way that you can figure out whether or not a person has CTE is when they are dead. That is the only way. It is such a small protein, I think, is how it was labeled. It's such a small protein that sits so deep, pretty much in the center of your brain, that you can scan for it with a CT or an X-ray, and you will not find it while a person is living. It is hard to. So, even when you might think that that is the case after a concussion, it's hard to label it. And it can repeat several times over. You see, one concussion may look on the surface as the defining one for whether or not a person may have it. Like, there are some major ones that we've seen over the years, and everybody will cite, for example, the Antonio Brown hit from Vontaze Burfict over the middle, as dirty as it was. They'll cite that as a potential reference point for CTE in him. All those are assumptions right now that can be had while a person is living. There's no way to guarantee that for sure. And even if that were to be the case, it takes a repetitive number of concussions, repeated hits over months, years, decades even, that start to create this small protein in your brain that leads to CTE. So it is genuinely hard to discover. For Kneeland, when they say that he'd been playing tackle football since the age of 7, unfortunate as it might be, the reality is that football is a contact sport. And to play tackle football since he was 7 doesn't inherently mean that he'd just automatically get CTE. That's not what this is saying. What it is saying is that when you have sustained hits for that much time, they can be small hits, they can be some major hits from time to time, but you'd been doing that for the past 17 years in the real game, in scrimmages, in other short practices, in drills, and it builds up over time. That's when you start to worry about CTE developing. And at 7, your brain is not fully developed. I believe that your brain finishes fully maturing if you're a male at the age of 25. Now, I could be wrong about that, but at 7 years old, you are far away from having a fully developed brain. So there is a concern in having those sustained hits, because they're not just affecting this potential protein developing in your brain. They're affecting the way that you actively can function in life. Motor skills and ability to recall, as they cite memory loss as a potential symptom of CTE. Like, it genuinely can spread so fast and affect you so quickly that you, in some cases, may not truly be able to recognize what is going on. It is just like, terrible, man. Yeah, like, impulsive behavior as well, and depression are other symptoms cited for CTE. And again, constantly sinking back into that element when things appear to be going good are a pattern of that. With those reports from college, you have Marshawn Kneeland in this setting and still, kind of slipping back into that mindset of not feeling up to par for what might be happening, and in some cases not feeling like he wanted to be around for the long haul. Now, even with all of that being said, it is important to understand as well that, as they say here, per Kneeland's family, in the statement that they put out after it, it doesn't necessarily suggest that it was the reason, the sole reason, why he took his own life on that night. Quote, "While this diagnosis does not change the tragedy of his passing, it provides important context about some of the struggles he may have been facing. We share this information to help people understand what NFL and other high-contact sport athletes might be struggling with. Raising awareness is important to us. We continue to remember Marshawn with compassion for the person he was, rather than defining him by the final moments of his life." End quote. As I kind of reiterated earlier. But, genuinely, that would not be the sole reason. There have been cases of CTE where it can lead you to do some of the most downright wildest things imaginable that a person who may not have the condition, I'd say, would be less likely to do for the most part. Again, you still have people out there who don't deal with any of that and may still decide to just commit that level of crime, generally to themselves, sometimes to other people, as other cases of CTE have seen over the years. So while it's possible that it might have played a part in Kneeland committing self-harm, at the same time, it would not be the sole reason for it, and it would be difficult to approach it in that way, because it is legitimately a situation that is not just a cut and dry scenario. So many different things could have potentially played a role in it that it's hard to label just one idea as the sole reason behind it. It'd be difficult to do that. And it wouldn't be particularly fair either. And you have to kind of think as well, it's just another reminder of what the condition can do. Because this has been a point of emphasis for many of the medical debates over the years in regards to the condition. This has spanned back decades to this point now. And per that research, as multiple articles stated, there happen to be 4 stages of CTE. If Kneeland could do that, potentially, while suffering from the very first stage, man, there have been other cases where things have gotten way worse, and where athletes have even had stage 4. again, they went into some specific examples of athletes here, but, one that struck me was that Aaron Hernandez, the former Patriots tight end, had a case of CTE so drastic that a family lawyer at the time said that, quote, it was the most severe case they had ever seen in someone of Aaron's age, end quote. And Aaron Hernandez at that time was fairly young himself. It is scary to see that. People that young and people as young as Marshawn Kneeland was at the time can suffer from CTE. And it rapidly increases its toll on your body and on your mind as this stuff again continues to build up over the years. It's just a weird way that the brain works. While it won't necessarily say it here, when you're sustaining that many hits, in a weird way, you believe in real time that you can continue to muscle through it. Even coaches as well who may see these repeated concussions, especially in the past, they'll sometimes say that, hey, you still have to play through it. Soldier up. Some people will beckon to a particular player as they still confront those multiple concussions. You can imagine just how many times something like that happened before they implemented the concussion protocol and forced people to miss the rest of entire games after suffering one. And even that is not necessarily enough when you consider that there are still some fairly hard hits that occur in this game today. You have working in your mind actively a bit of a lower resistance to those hits that develop the small protein. But in real time, you're thinking after you go through 1 and 2 and 3, maybe I just don't really feel it the same way. On to the next play, on to the next down, whatever the case may be. And that's an unfortunate mentality to have, but some players, again, force themselves to do it. Some coaches have projected those ideas onto them, and it just makes for a very toxic scenario. These cases seem, from the outside looking in, just horrible, but these are not the first of their kind, and especially amongst the young people. As this quote states via Dr. Ann McKee from the Boston University CTE Center and the VA Boston Healthcare System, she says, quote, "We have found this progressive brain disease in nearly half of the athletes we've studied who have died before the age of 30. Thanks to the generosity of our brain donor families, we now better understand the early stages of CTE, and it is bringing us closer than ever to diagnosing it during life. My team and I are fully dedicated to finding effective treatments and a cure for CTE," end quote. Half. Now again, that is not a fully comprehensive number, because it's not necessarily saying that the athletes that they've particularly studied prior to the age of 30 have all suffered from the condition. They're not even saying in this one that all of the athletes in general that they've studied have suffered from this condition. Although when you look at that specific metric, it is over half in regards of the cases that have actually been reported and sent over to them. But to have that number be the case before the age of 30 amongst the athletes that they have gone through in terms of identifying and also, examining. Like, again, I'm not going to get too graphic, but you will legitimately have to go so far into the brain to find the protein and link it to CTE. That's the process. To find that in half of those athletes is a pretty damning tell as to what the trend is. And it does not paint a great picture, which is kind of why you've seen this huge player safety initiative from the NFL over the past few years. It's something that was very much allowed when it came to the booming hits in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and even far before then, when the technology wasn't as nearly advanced as it is now, when the equipment wasn't as durable as it is now. Like, man, people could just tee off on one another and it would prove to be legal. That's not necessarily the case anymore, and it's numbers like those that paint the picture as to why. What usually happens in cases of CTE are that a family will ask to have the brain eventually sent over to this particular center. And in some cases as well, athletes who are actively playing may not understand that they are dealing with it. But in post-retirement, there have been instances with some people who have suffered from CTE in which they clearly understand or have a hunch that they are dealing with it. And they decide before a situation even gets out of control, they already have such a strong belief that they have suffered from it that they send their own brains over to this Boston University CTE Center for examination in the posthumous sense. They will go down, fill out the document, and ask it to be sent over to them themselves. So again, it's not a situation to take lightly. And to have Kneeland face that at such a young age, it hurts. It's a similar situation where he may not end up being the last person to confront it. But like the family said in their statement, you want to shed light on it. You want to spread awareness to that. To ensure that while, the cases of this magnitude might still happen, that less and less do. Like, it's never going to be a perfect correlation, but at the very least, if we can get the word out there and if we can really improve on this player safety and, prevent incidents like this from repeatedly happening at such a high rate, then we've done our job. So those are really the main things here. At least for the family in this situation, in some twisted way, while it doesn't do the whole deed for them, it does give them at least some glimpse of clarity as to what may have happened with Marshawn Kneeland in those last few moments, at least a little bit. And honestly, that's all that one can ask for in such a case. It's all that one can ask for. So, You have this development there on top of the fact that Montserrat is now a mother of a near 1-year-old son. Like I said, you just hope for this message to continue to get out there, and also that she, her son, the entire family are well taken care of moving forward from this. But that'll do it for this one. Peace.